Welcome to Web Wonders. So today we'll try to explain about model and storing the data to the database. Now we will learn about model. So model is a representation of data that is used to bind user interface controls to the data in order to edit, display and manipulate. So it's basically a container which holds data which can be manipulated and which provides data to the interface. So whatever we change in the interface, it will be reflected back in the model. So there are different types of models. So JSON model, XML model, OData model, resource models. So in general, if it's a JSON and XML models, which are called as client-side models, which can be used to store data locally, it's a small to medium size of data sets. If it's a OData models, it's a server-side models with a large data set which can be brought from remote server. And if it's a resource model which can be used for internationalization and store text resources in properties files. So these are the different kinds of model. So right now we'll just concentrate on JSON models. So as I mentioned JSON, so the data is stored in a JSON format, which you can see here for a person, a name and age and gender. So which is a JSON object. So models can be set at different levels. So we can declare a model at a component level, we can declare a model at view level or a controller level. And binding data from the model to the user interface is done using a data binding syntax, which I'll show you. So basically it's like a curly braces. We'll try to use it as different frameworks uses the same way. So we'll try to bind a data from a model to a input box using curly braces. So as an example, what we are going to try now is I'm going to create a model first and use this model to show data in the UI, the sign up page. And if I change the data in the sign up page inputs, so I'll show you how the data is reflected in model using a console. After that, we'll try to set up Firebase and use the Firebase in our application and create an user and create an user using this sign up form. So this will be the next steps. So I'll start creating the model first. How and where to create it. So we'll start with sign up page. So as I already mentioned, we'll try to enter the data here and we'll try to create an account in the Firebase. So for that we need to start with the declaration of a model. So we'll go to Visual Studio and let's go to manifest.json. So now we'll declare our model here. So there is a section for models. So in which a model is already present. You can see it's a resource model here. The type of this model I18N is a resource model. That means it stores, this can be used for I18N, translations, internationalization. So if you want to change a label for a different language, then you can use this model. So now to hold our data from the sign up page, we need a model to be declared and it's a client side model. So we try to declare a JSON model. So for that, we need to give a name for this model. So I would give it as user details. And what's the type of this model? It's a JSON model. So for that, sap dot UI dot model dot JSON dot JSON model. That's it. So this is how we declare a model. Now I want to show some dummy data already in the UI. So for that purpose, we need to create an object and assign a data object and assign it to the model. So as we want to do it for a sign up controller, I want to do this assignment of data for this model in the sign up controller itself. So for that, I'll go to controller, sign up a controller, and in which I would like to add one more point here, that as soon as this view, sign up view is loaded, it tries to load the controller as well. So when the controller is loaded, it will load a lifecycle hookup methods. So what are these method? I would start with first method called as onInit. So as soon as this view is loaded, this onInit method will be loaded. So for that purpose, so as soon as the view loads, I want this onInit method loads. So for that reason, I will write the logic which needs to be initiated as soon as the view is loaded. So okay, so the method will be like this. So on init, and it's also a function, and we need to separate each method with a comma. Okay, so this is how it is. Now I need to bring the model which is declared in the manifest. So for that, I'll try to declare constant. It's just a variable. So maybe I'll declare user model. So it's just a variable. And now to bring the model from the manifest. So the same way we brought the router from the manifest. Okay. So we start with this. This means this controller. And for this controller, we need to get a component. So we have an owner component. So we got the owner component. In the component, the manifest is present. So now we need to get the model. So we try to write the model, and we need to give the model name here. So which is user, so which is user details. So this is how I got a model and kept it in a variable. Now what I do is I'll try to declare a JSON object which is details. So the variable names can be anything. Okay, so I'll declare the variable now. So now I'll try to give name. So let me start with web wonders and email webwonders@gmail.com. Now password. So these are the four fields we have in the output. Okay, so confirm password. That's it. So now as I show you, model has been fetched from the manifest and a dummy JSON object was declared. Now I need to assign this dummy JSON object to the model. So for that, what we'll do is we'll write user model dot set property. So we need to set a property. So there are two things. One is set data and set property. I prefer to use set property always. So set property, and I want to give it a name as sign up details. And now this is like an attribute. Now we need to pass the value. What is the value? We pass the O details. This is how you can see. Now a model, we set a property, the attribute of, the name or the ID of the property is this one, and we have assigned the values of O details, value as a O detail. Okay, so this is how you declare a model in the manifest and assign a dummy data, for example, to this model. Okay, now I need to bind this model to the UI. So once I bind it, you should be able to see the data here directly. Okay, now what I do is I'll go to view, which is signup.view. So I'll go to input. The first one is a name input and the value is empty right now. So as I mentioned already, to bind the data, we need to use curly braces. And in this curly braces, I would start with the model name, which is given in the manifest, which is user details. So let me copy it and I'll go here, paste it. So in this model, so after the model name, you need to give this arrow mark. And in this model, we have an attribute called as, so you can go to sign up controller. We have an attribute called as sign up details. So you can just copy this with the slash and go here and paste it here. So now in the user details models, in this sign up details, it's an attribute. So what we are looking for, we are trying to assign the name. So we can assign this name attribute here. You need to give slash and assign the name here. Okay. Similarly, I'll just try to copy this. I'll go to the email and I'll try to type email. So this is also an property from the object. So this is the email. Okay. I'll try to save it. Now I go to the output. So let me refresh. As soon as I refresh, you can see by default this name and the email has come up here. I haven't given password, so it's okay. But this is how a model which has a data which is declared in manifest and data was assigned in the controller is binded to a XML view and the data is shown here. It's a two-way binding. So now whatever data which is present in the controller is shown on the Excel on the UI. Now if I change the values in the UI, it should be reflected in the model also. So this I will try to show you. So for that reason, what I will do is I'll try to go to sign up controller again. So we have a button. For example, we have a button which is on press sign in. So we have a method event for this button called as on press sign in. So we don't have this method declared. So I'll try to copy this function and go to the controller. And now I will write this function here. So in this function, what I do is as soon as I click on the button, I'll try to fetch the details which are present in the model and print it as a console. Okay. So now to fetch the details from the model, as a similar way, we need to fetch the model first. I'll try to do it again. So to fetch the model, you need to do is this dot get owner component dot get model. So in this model, which model you want to fetch? It is user details. Just don't get confused with the names. Okay. So this is the model. This is how you fetch the model. Now I just want to assign this model to a variable again. So for that, I'll try to declare the same similar variable like user model. And this is how the model is present in this variable o user model. Now I want to fetch data from this constant. So o details. Okay. In the similar as above, we see we have set the data to the model. Now we want to get the data from the model. So you use the model and you now use get property. And which property you want to get from this model? So this is the same name I would use because we have set the data to this property and we have to fetch the data from this property. So now I try to write console.log just to show you how it looks like. So details. So I'm just trying to print this O details in a console and see how our data reflects. Okay. So now as soon as I click on sign up, you are seeing the data. Okay, see which is assigned in the controller. Really, if you go I- If you go to the code, you can see web wonders, password test well. So exactly this was shown here. So this is the data which is present in the model. Okay, I haven't binded password confirm password. That's the reason even though there is a data in the model, you cannot see it here. Okay. Now I'll add web wonders version 1. Maybe I'll remove this and test at the red Gmail. So I'm trying to change the full name and the email and click on sign up. As soon as I click on sign up, you can see Web Wonders now has the new name and a new email. Why? Because the data is binded. So it's a two-way binding. So whatever we change in the inputs get reflects in the model, and wherever we change in the model, it get reflects in the UI. So this is how the model works. I mean, the binding works. Now, as a next step, we'll try to initialize the Firebase and use this model to create an account with this email and password. So now let's start with creating a project in the Firebase. So for that, we need to navigate to uh, console.firebase.google.com. So this is where we'll try to register our app or configure our app, and where we have an authentication APIs, authentication methods, and Firestore as a database to store the data. Okay, you can just log in, and if you are a first user, you will not see any projects. So you need to click on create project. If you are already a user of this Firebase, you can see different projects which you are created already here. Okay, so let me create a project, and I'll try to name the project as FireUI5 FireUI5 Task Manager. So let me continue it. If you want to have some Google Analytics, you can enable it as it is. If not, you no need to enable, but I'll just continue with it. And you need to select an account. So you can just select a default account for Firebase. So it's just so now it tries to create an project. So we need to wait for some time. So you can see now our project is ready. Okay. So now we log into our project. So here right now we don't have anything. It's a fresh project. So now we need to start with adding an app. Okay. So so we are creating a web application. So if you are creating an iOS app, you need to select this. If it's an Android, you need to select this. If it's a web app, you need to select this. So we are creating a web application, so I would select this web application, and you need to register our app, and we need to give a name. So I'll try to give Fire UI5. It's a short. Okay. And we are not hosting right now this app in Firebase, so we don't need this. Okay, so now we try to register this application, and then now in the backend, this Firebase is trying to generate some configurations which are needed for us. Okay, either you can use an npm as a bundler model, or else as a script tag you can use this Firebase stickers directly with the URLs. Okay, so I would follow this process, but I will explain a little bit later. But the important point here you need to really see is you need to get this configuration, which is important for us because we'll use this configuration to connect the front end application with the back end. Okay, so we'll copy this and I'll try to paste it in my notepad, as a reference because we need it at the latest step. So I'll try to continue to the console. So this is the first setup where we have initialized our Firebase application. So after this, we need to enable the authentication method. So for that, you need to go to build and enable it. So in the authentication method, you need to also, it's a fresh one. So you need to get started. So for the authentication, there are different providers. Okay, you can use Google, Facebook, Apple, Twitter, Microsoft, whatever you want. But the native providers are like email and password. So let us choose this email and password for this particular case. Okay, so as soon as I choose it, so we have two options here, email and password enable. I don't want to do a passwordless sign in, so I just select this option and save it. That's it. So this is enabled. This is the first part. Now I also want to enable a Firestore database where we'll try to store our task information or user information. So I'll just select this. So it will try to initialize also. So we need to also create a database here. So we can click on this database. So when you try to create a database, it so in Firebase we need to have some rules. Okay, so it's not like everyone can write to your database. We need to restrict it based on your or authentication method or roles or documents. So you need to think of it. So for now, I'll just start in a test mode so that until next 30 days, you can allow to write. Anyone can allow to write and read. So you need to select the Firestore location. We'll just select it as a default. So now it is trying to create a Firestore for us. So where we can have collections and stuff. Okay. So now I'll try to explain this part little later. Now we'll go to the UI and try to use the configurations, Firebase configurations, and set up this Firebase configuration in the UI part. So for that, I'll navigate to UI. Okay, good. Let me go down. So now the first most important thing is we need to go to index.html file. Okay, where we are going to add Firebase SDK scripts which allows your application to access this Firebase APIs. Okay, so we'll use Firebase app API, Firestore API, and Authentication API. So which are the three things which we enabled or started right now in the Firebase console. So I'll just copy this script and paste it here. You can paste it in a header section and you can I'll try to paste these links in the description. Okay, so you can see we are trying to use 8.10 version here, and so the first one is a Firebase application SDK, and the second one is Firestore, and the third one is Authentication SDK. So uh, after we have added this Firebase SDK scripts, now let's try to create a new file in this model folder. So where I'll try to create a firebase.js file. So this is an empty file right now. So now if you see in controller, okay, any of the controllers, okay, so I'm just going through any of the controllers. For example, let's take maybe main view controller. I'll go to the top, and so we have a section SAP UI define and also function here. Okay, so I haven't explained this part until now. And similarly, if you go to model.js, we have something the same format. Okay, so now in the Firebase it is new file, so I'll try to explain this part, and we'll try to write the code here. Okay, so this file will hold the Firebase related code in our application. We start with sap.ui.define. So as soon as you do this, it is generating a template, or you can also manually type it. Okay, so I'll just delete these dependencies which I don't need right now, so I'll just leave it like this as of now. Okay, so this sap.ui defined function is used to define a new module, which is an independent unit of code that can be imported into other modules. Okay, so now for example, we have a library. uh, you all already know we have a library called sap.m, uh, which fetches input controls. For example, I go here. Okay, let me explain it here. So we have a sap.m library where it brings the mobile related controls, and sap.ui layout which brings layout related controls. So these are different libraries. Okay, similarly, as we are writing here in the top in view XML lns colon L, so wherever we need to use this library, we just use this alias name L. Okay, likewise in the controllers or in the JS files we can also do it. For example, in this case I need to use a library which will be useful to create a JSON model, so which is ideally, so I'll just try to write it here. So the library is like this: sap dot ui dot model dot json dot json model. So this is one library. Okay, sap.ui dot model, and json model is one function or this thing, so which we can use to create a json model. So now if I need to create a new model, every time I need to write this entire line. Okay, instead of that we can define our functions at the top like this: sap slash ui slash model slash json slash json slash json model json model. Okay, so we can define it like this, and we need to keep it in a double quotes. Okay, so after you do this, so as soon as I declared one library here, so I need to give a alias name. So in the view we are doing it like xml ns colon L and the library. Here we try to give the library here and the alias name inside the function, so it is json model. Okay, now this library is linked to this as a alias name. Okay, so if you have second one, for example, I just try to type a dummy one for now: sap dot sap slash m slash message box. Okay, so this is one control: sap dot slash dot m message control. So whenever I want to use a message box, I don't need to write sap dot m dot message box. Instead I can just copy this as an alias name. Anything can be kept. Okay, so I'm just keeping alias name as a message box so I can understand it. So now whenever I try to use this library, I can just use message box so that the control is accessible. Okay, so that's the use of this. So I'll just delete this code. Okay, so now let me save it. So this is the first part we have done right now. So after that, if you remember, we have a configuration uh, defined created in the Firebase earlier. Okay, the Firebase has created some configurations for us. So we'll try to use the configuration as it is. Okay, I'll try to copy it from the notepad. So I'll just paste it. So I'll maybe write some comment: configuration from Firebase, paste. Okay. So this is the configuration which we got from the Firebase project. Okay. Now we'll define a function named initialize Firebase, which initializes the Firebase SDK and creates a new JSON model object containing the references to Firestore and Fire Authentication. because now we need to initialize it. Okay, so for that I'll try to write a function, initialize Firebase, initialize Firebase function. So in this function we need to write Firebase dot. Okay, so we have a, this is the SDK, Firebase is an SDK now. So we have an initialize Firebase as a initialize app as a function from Firebase, so which will help us to initialize our app. So app initialize app, so we need to use this configuration. So now our application has been initialized. After our application has been initialized, now we need to, for example, access Firestore. Okay, so for that I'll try to create a variable and as a Firestore, and now I'll try to access Firebase dot Firestore method. Okay, there is a Firestore method which will initialize the Firestore. Similarly, I need to initialize the authentication. So fire auth, you can give any variable name, it doesn't matter. So Firestore dot auth, so which will initialize the Firestore authentication SDK. Okay, now I will try to keep this in a model. Okay, so I need to pass this as a model so that I can access anywhere in the application. So that's the main use of models also. If you try to set this model to the component, so you can access this model anywhere. So in future, if you want to use this authentication or file store in any of the controls, so it's better we write it to a model. Okay, so for that purpose, I'll try to declare a model which is called Firebase model. So now the library comes into the picture in the from the top. So now instead of writing sap dot ui dot model dot json model, and so instead of writing this entire thing, as we have declared our defined our library here, so you can directly use this one. So no need to have this entire path, you can just remove it and just have it like this. Okay, now I need to pass the data to here. Okay, so what I want to store in this JSON model, I want to store this Firestore and FireAuth, the big libraries itself. Okay, because there are multiple functions inside it, we can use them. Okay, so for that I'll try to create an object. So as you can directly write it, but I prefer to create an object. So I'll create an object like this, and I'll have an property called Firestore and assign the variable Firestore here. And similarly, oh sorry, and similarly I'll have FireAuth and assign the variable FireAuth here. And now assign this object to the model. So after which I'll try to return this model. So this is how a method is declared to initialize all the required things from Firebase, and we assign it to the model. So whenever we need, we try to access this model. But now the problem is, okay, we need to initialize this. We need to call this function somewhere so that everything is initialized whenever our application itself is started. So for that, we need a good place. Okay, so what will be loaded at first when our application started? It's index.html. Then it tries to trigger the component.js. So now we try to call this method from the component.js, so that as soon as our application starts, our application tries to connect to the Firebase and load all the required things for us. Okay, so to call this method, we need to So this is a function, okay? So we need to return this method somewhere so that it can be called. So for that purpose, I'll try to keep this entire method in a return. So let me copy this function and I'll try to write it in the return. So this is how you will write code related to Firebase in one single file. Okay, now we need to go to component and try to call this function. Okay, so we'll go to component.js and go to the init method, because init method is the method which will be called at first whenever component.js is called. Similarly, we have init methods in every controller, so that whenever this controller or the XML file loads, it tries to call this init method at first. Okay, so now we need to import this Firebase module at the top. Okay, so as I said, it's a kind of a library or a file. Okay, we need to let component.js know that there is a file called firebase.js, and then also let the component know that we should call a function. Okay, for that we'll try to first of all let component.js know that there is a firebase.js. Okay, I'll just copy this exact thing. So our file is in the model itself. So I'll try to replace this with Firebase. Okay, so now as soon as I write something in the define, I also need to give an alias name in the function. Okay, so I'll give a Firebase. So now I have given the alias name. Now I can access this file. Okay, now I'll try to call the method which we thought Firebase dot, which was declared in the Firebase dot file. What is this method called? This is initialize Firebase. So now it means we are trying to call this method from the component.js, which makes this method accessible. The Firebase configure at the initial stage the application is loaded. So calling this method only doesn't work. Okay, so we need, after calling this method, it tries to return a model for us. So we need to set this model to the component. So this is like, this means this is the file. So it is component.js, and we are trying to set a model here. So set model, which model, which this method returns, and we are giving the name Firebase for this model. So now whenever you would like to use the Firebase authentication or Firestore database, okay, you can just call this model Firebase, which in turn returns Firestore and FireAuth, so we can directly use them to authenticate or to retrieve data, to write data, to create new user, to sign in the user. So everything we can do. Okay. So now let's go back to our application and see if our application is still working. So So it seems there is a problem with our application. Let me go back. So it seems there is some problem with my application. Let me go back, go to Firestore. And so here is the problem. So I need to access it from the Firebase, not from the Firestore. So now after we initialized our Firebase setup, now we'll try to attach the Firebase methods, or yeah, create an account using this form. Okay, so we'll try to fill the details and click on sign up. Then a new user has to be created in the authentication in the Firebase. So I'll try to write this method and execute and show you in the console of Firebase that you can really see that the user has been created. After that, we'll try to sign in with the same user and see if the sign in is successful or not. Okay, so for that, I need to I need to write the method in this button. Okay, whenever I click on sign up, this method should trigger to create the user. Okay, so let me go to my my VS Code, go to signup.controller. Okay, yeah. So press sign in. So this is the function for that button. Okay, let me do one thing first of all. So I don't want to have a default values here. So I'll try to delete this default values and leave them empty because it doesn't really make sense. Okay, leave them empty. And if you remember, we have only binded name and email, but not password and confirm password. Okay, so let's go to the sign up page and try to copy this, and for the password input we'll keep it here and give the password as here, and for confirm password also in the value we'll try to paste it, and it is the property is confirm password. Let me copy it and paste it here. So confirm password. So now every input is really binded. Okay, so this is important that you should not miss it. So now let me delete this console. We don't need this console. Okay, I'll try to write the logic to create an account for user. Okay, so in Firebase we need to create an user there. So for that, what we need to do is, as I already said, we need to fetch the Firebase SDK first of all to call the relevant methods. To fetch it, as just 5 minutes back we have created a model for Firebase, so we need to fetch the model first. So for that I'll try to declare a variable, so which is constant or Firebase model. It can be any name, it's a variable. So now to fetch the model which is declared in the component, what you should do is this is this controller get owner component. So this, now we went to the component where we need to get the model which is Firebase, and in this model we have a data, so we need to get the data. So which data we'll get? We'll get two things. One is Firebase auth and the other one is Firestore. Okay, now I try to use this data. Maybe I'll treat as model data because I'm trying to get the data itself, not the model. So Firebase model data dot fire auth. So this is the SDK here. Okay, so now we have a method called create user with email and password. Okay, so this is the method we have in the Firebase. So I'll try to show this method in the Firebase SDK and the documentation. Let me go here. Let me go to the browser. Let me go to. So this link as well, I'll try to keep it in the description. So if you see here, if you scroll down, so we are using version 8. Okay, so this is the one. So you can see create a new account by passing user email ID and password. So this is the method. Okay, this is the logic. Okay, firebase.auth. So this is how it is used here. So we are trying to use this from a model, but the other rest of the method is same. So I'll try to copy this method. So I'll go to our console code again and try to paste it here. Okay, so now you can see some code is there, but yeah, a lot of errors. It's fine. So I'll try to delete them, everything in between, because we don't need them. Okay, ignore the errors. Okay, so now we need to pass email ID and password. So this model, O details, sign up details, which we have created, okay, should have the username and password. So for that, so I'll try to copy O details dot email. So this is the email, and the second one is password. So O details dot password. So we are trying to pass email ID and password. So if it is success, it will come here. If it is failure, it will come here. So if it's success, I'll keep a message box success, user created successfully. If it's error, I'll try to show the error message. To show a message box, I need to add the library here. So in the double quotes, I'll try to write comma separated. Okay, sap slash m slash message box. Now after you import the library, as I said, you need to write a give an alias name for this. Okay, so for now I write it like this, message box. Okay, so now I try to use message box here dot success user created successfully. Similarly, I'll try to create a message box error. I'll try to get the error message from the backend itself. So error dot message, it should give the exact error which comes from the backend. So now I'll try to save it, go to the UI, I'll refresh. Now I enter a full name and as a email ID web wonders maybe underscore world @gmail.com, password 123456 and re-enter the password 123456. So I just entered some password, okay, for now. So we just need to pass email ID and password. We are not doing any validations from the front end right now. We are just clicking on sign up and see user created successfully. It's a success message. Okay, now I go to the Firebase console and go to authentication page, and you can see here, so this is our email ID which is created. So user has been created here. Let me go back. Okay, so now it's the same information. Now I try to click on sign up again. Let's see what happens. See, as soon as I click on it, it says the email address is already in use because the user is already created. If I try to change, okay, the email ID and sign up, now it is success again because the new email ID. Okay, let me go back and refresh the console. You can see the new email ID has been created. As you have already seen the authentication method, so you can see the users here. Now I want to explain a little bit about Firestore database, how the data will be stored and others. Okay, so unlike SQL, Firebase is an non-SQL database, no SQL database. Okay, so where it stores the data in a JSON format. So for example, so we have an option Firestore database. So you can just, if it is not present in the build, you can just click on this and get started so that it will come into the shortcuts. Okay. So here you have different tabs, rules, data, index, and usage. For now, I'll concentrate on the data part. Okay. For example, if we want to save some data from a front-end application, how will it be stored here? So that's what we need to see. So similarly, if you know a SQL database, we have a tables. In the tables, we have columns, and the data will be stored in the rows. Okay. Likewise, we have a collection in Firebase. Firebase or MongoDB, we have a collection. Okay, so as soon as I click on collection, you can give a collection name. It's like a table name. For example, I want to give user underscore details. Okay, so I click on next. So as soon as a collection is created, like a table is created, it's asking us to add its first document. First document in the sense it's a data first row, I would say. For example, from the table perspective, the first row. So so we need to have a unique ID. So for that, there's a document ID. You can give any unique ID. You can just type maybe 1234 it if it's a unique in your thing, or there's an option to auto generate it. Okay, so I have auto generated it. And now in a database table, we have a column and a value for it. For example, first name is a column, last name is a column, and for the values, for example, first name is wonders, last name is web. So likewise, we can have it. Okay. So here you can see as a field, I can give first name. Okay, you can give in any format, and what's the type of the field? It's a string, and maybe for example, I give John. Okay, so I have second field called last name. Okay, string. So I can give for example, Kate. Okay, and the third one, I think maybe I can give age, for example, and you can see the type. You have an different options here. Okay, it can be string, number, boolean, or array itself. You can store as a array itself. Okay, so I can maybe select age as a number 24. Okay, so now I can add more fields. uh, but I'll right now save it. Okay, as soon as I save, you can see there is a table. So it's like a collection here, user details, and in that we have a first row of data. It's like a document as it has a unique ID, and in this document you have different fields and values. So what's the advantage here? So storing the data in JSON formats has different disadvantages and advantages. The advantage is, so now we can just grab this data as a JSON format and we can directly bind into our UI. Okay. So unlike if it's a table, it's first of all we need to fetch the data from using a query and then convert it to a JSON format, and then we have to use it. Okay, so this conversion part, it's not needed in this, but the disadvantage would be we need to store a lot of duplicate data just uh, to get accurate data, because if in JSON, I mean, if it's a SQL table, okay, it's that we can have joins and unions. We can do combine different tables using foreign keys and stuff, but it is not possible here. So that's the reason you need to store a duplicate data. Okay, this is would be one of the simple disadvantage, I would say. Okay, but yeah, so now this is how you can store data. If I want to add new record, I can add and auto generate, and similarly, you can have first name. And the other thing is, if it's SQL table, there are strict number of columns. If the first row has three columns and the second row will also have three columns itself. But in this case, it's not like that. For example, I only have first name. I don't have the age and last name. So I can use this. Okay. So I can just save it like this. It will not throw error. So likewise, you can see the first record has three fields and the second record has only one field. Okay, so this is it will not show any error. Okay, so this is how the data will be stored. And if you also have a query builder, you can really use this query builder how to retrieve the data and stuff. You can try to check it out, but as of now I don't go through this. Okay, you can just run it. You can see the data. That's the only I can add query. And if you want to add count, for example, okay, count documents and run, so you can see count. So likewise, you can add different queries. Okay, you can add where and order by and limit. Okay, so yeah, this is how the data will be stored. Now what we will do is we'll try to if I go to my application, okay, I don't have an account. So when we fill full name, email ID, password and confirm, and we try to sign up, we are trying to create an account in the authentication page. Okay, Although here we are just storing the email ID and password is automatically stored, but I want to store this full name and email in Firestore database in a collection called user details. Okay, I want to store this full name and email. Okay, so that's my target right now. Okay, so for that I'll go to my controllers. Okay, so I'll just scroll down here. So what I will do is I'll try to write a private method. So in general, what is a private method? Okay, why I said private method? Okay, it's not a strict terminology to use, but I'm using it just for understanding purpose. Okay, so when a method, for example, now to sign in, it's a method called from XML. So this is kind of a public method, I would say. So it is being called from somewhere. Okay. But if a method is called internally from other method, so then it's not called from a XML view, but it is just being called in the controller itself. Then it is a private method. So for that, I start with underscore just to differentiate what is a private method and what's a method which is being called from the XML view. So for this case, I would write a method name post to user details and colon, and how to write, we it's a function, so we'll write function. And right now I'm not taking any user parameters, but I'll just leave it like this. So this is how I declared a function right now, or a method. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to post data to Firestore. Okay, so for that I need to get the Firebase model, because if you remember in the Firebase model, in the Firebase.js, so I am having a Firebase model where it stores Firestore and FireAuth. Okay, for the above case, we are trying to use Fire Authentication because we are trying to create a user ID, email, I mean, create a email and password in the authentication. Now we have to use Firestore. So for this, as the same way as we did here, we need to get this model. For example, so I'll try to write it again. Okay, so const of Firebase model data. So I'm just writing some variable. So how to get this model, this dot, so this is the controller, and get owner component. So we went to the owner component, and now we are trying to get the model which is declared there, which is Firebase. So after getting the model, we want to get the data from this model. So which data it will fetch? It will fetch this libraries Firestore and FireAuth. Okay, so now what I do is, so now I have the uh, data from Firebase model into this variable. Okay, so I copy it here, and from this data I want to use Firestore because this is where I want to store the data. Okay, so we need this library too. So this library has this. Okay, so Firestore dot collection. So which collection you want to store data? So it's, for example, user details. There is a collection created already. It's not, if it's not created, it will try to create, right, this case. Okay, so now after creating, uh, accessing collection, what we want to do, we need to want to add data. Okay, you can just add data. So for that we need to pass which data we need to add. So this is one way we do it. Okay, so maybe for example I'll do maybe name as web wonders, email as, so it's a string email also, so it will be test at the rate 123.com, for example. Okay, so now this way we can add the data. If we try to call this method either from XML or from internal methods, it will try to create a record with add, record with this name and email. But so for every document we need a unique ID. So when you do this, it will automatically auto generate this unique ID. Okay, so no need to worry about that. Okay, but now for my case, okay, here in this case, what I want to do is, so whenever I click on this sign up button, okay, if it's a new email ID, it tries to create a new record in the authentication service. Okay, so only then when this is successful, only then I want to post data to this user details, not every time. Okay, so now for example, okay, so whenever I created this authentication for this email ID, so it will store the username and the password in this authentication method. At the same time, when this is success, I want to go to Firestore and also store the first name and the email ID in this user details collection. Okay, so for that, I want to do is, and also I want to point out one thing. As I said, right now in the Firestore, this document ID is auto generated, but we can also keep this ID ourselves. Okay, we can give any number. What I want to do is also, whenever this authentication is created, there is a user UID generated for this each user as a separate UID. Okay, so now I want to use this UID to as a document ID in the user details collection. Okay, so you need to understand this. So whenever there is a record created in this authentication, whenever a new email ID or a user has been signed up, a new user has been signed up, it tries to add the record here and generate a UID. I want to take this UID, user name and email, and want to create a record in this collection. Okay, so this is our action right now. So for that, what I want to do is, so I want to call this method only when user creation has been successful. So what I need to do is, I need to copy this method. Okay, I need to call in this step. Okay, because whenever it tries to call this create user email ID, user with email ID and password, it, if it's a success it comes here, if it's a failure it comes here. If it's a success, I want to call this method. So how do I call this method? Okay, so where is this method? This method is in this controller. So I can do this dot, okay, this controller, okay, this dot method name. So I can do this. So whenever I do this, it tries to come to this method, I mean this success thing, and then it calls. Okay, but there could be one problem. Okay, sometimes this can be referred to this service. Okay, so that's the reason I want to tell that this is this controller. Okay, what I do is I just declare a variable, for example const, that it can be anything. Okay, so I'll post save it as this. So as soon as this method is called, we are at a controller level. Okay, so I stored the controller in this method. So now I want to call this that dot post method. It's just uh, sometimes this refer to the current object also. If we write this, it can refer to this current object fireauth, and it tries to check a method in this fireauth and it cannot find. Okay, it's uh, just to say that we need to call a method which is present in the controller. So that's the reason I have written it like that. Okay, so now what I want to do is, so when I call this method, I want to send the information like user name and email, and also the UID. So the UID which is created in the service. Okay, so what I should do is, first of all I'll try to create a const. Okay, it's a object here which stores name from this o details dot name, comma, and the other one is email, which is o details dot email. So now I'm trying to create a new object which is user, which just has name and email, because I want to store only these two in my user details collection. So I will pass this as one parameter. So now I'm passing the data as a user. And the second thing is I want to also pass the document ID. So the document ID will be the UID from the user created. So whenever this user has been created, it passes some information to this variable. So this variable has, you can just use console.log and print what it contains. Okay. But right now I can just directly say this user variable as a user object, and this user object as .uid. So uh, this user object has this UID. So if you write it like this, it passes UID as well as the user to this method. So now when we write this, so there are two input parameters as being passed. So we need to catch them here. So for that, I'll try to write user and UID. You can give any variable names. It's not an issue. Okay. So it's not like we should match the variables exactly. You can write user one or user 2, whatever you would like. You can give any variable name. Okay. So now uh, so now we need to take this user and UID and pass it. Okay. So now instead of giving this statically, I can just write user. So when I do this, what happens is we are just considering the user data but not really passing UID. So we are not saying the collection that we need to also give a UID, which is from the authentication service. So for that purpose, we have a different method, different set here. So after collection, so collection as a document ID. So for that reason, we write doc in the brackets. If you don't give anything, it will create a new UID or new ID, document ID. But here I give a document ID, and I try to use, instead of add, I try to use set. Okay, because as soon as I give a UID, specific UID, I need to use set. Okay, so I save it. So now this is the way we write it. Okay, so let me just give it here. So you can see we have created a private method which tries to create a record in the user details collection with specific UID, which is a UID generated whenever a user is created and the data is passed. Okay, this is how you write the function. Okay, so this is one example. Okay, so this is only the example we are trying to create whenever there's a successful user created. So it's not required every time. Okay, so instead of calling this from a different method from the controller, you could also call this method on a button click. But whenever you click on a button, you should store your data into a specific model, okay, which I explained earlier, how we are storing data for this sign up details. Okay, so the similar way we try to store the data in this specific model, and you can use this model to pass as to the backend. Okay, so it's not like every time we call it the same way. We can directly call this post methods directly from the XML on a button clicks. Just we need to pass the model data and save it. Okay, this is how it is. But now let's test this scenario. So let's go back to here. Okay, let me refresh for just a safety. So now I'll try to write web wonders. Okay, so web wonders Firestore. Okay, so just a test. So now what I write email ID is firestore test@gmail.com. Okay, so 1 2 3 4 5 6, I'm just giving a random password. Okay, so now I try to enter full name and email and password and confirm password. When I click on sign up, what it does is it tries to create an authentication user in this authentication service and generate a UID, and using this UID it tries to create a item in this Firestore collection. Okay, so we'll have right now two documents. The third document will be created. So let me press it. So as soon as you press, we got a message, the user created successfully. Okay, so now let me go back here. If I go to authentication, you can see the email ID has been created and UID has been generated. Okay, just remember the last three digits, OT2. Okay, if I go to Firestore database user details, you can see we have third record now, which is also O2 OT2. Okay, so this is the record. It stored email ID in the name which we have given here. Okay, this is how you store the data. Okay, so it's always suggested that after creating this set user, you need to also write dot then and catch if it's a success or not and a error or not. Okay, so this I'll try to explain it little bit later, but this is how you store the data in a collection. Okay,